Hello, public speaking students. At this point in our course, you've put a lot of really important basic tools into your public speaking toolbox. We've looked at the basic idea behind extemporaneous public speaking that involves preparation as well as a relaxed conversational delivery. We've talked about everything from principles of topic selection and audience analysis to the location and development of supporting materials, the construction and organization of main points in a way that are effective, and basic principles of effective delivery of your speech to an audience. What we need to do now is to take those tools and apply them with some next level activity. And that's moving from the important purpose of speaking to inform to the even more challenging and sometimes arguably more important rhetorical purpose of speaking to persuade. So this brief video is intended to introduce you to the persuasive speech assignment that's coming up very soon in the course, as well as presenting a preliminary assignment, the strategy report, which is going to be a written brief that you'll put together in preparation for that persuasive speech. Now, why are we doing any of this stuff in the first place? We've talked about throughout the course how public speaking is important not just in a variety of different career applications, but also in your public life as a citizen. And certainly, as we'll continue to talk about in the course, speaking to persuade is vitally important. Whether you're applying persuasion in a business context, in everything from convincing coworkers and bosses to take a particular approach, or engaging in very specific kinds of business applications where persuasion is at the very heart, such as marketing or sales or public relations. Of course, you could be involved in a profession, such as the law, in which argument before not just coworkers or colleagues, but argument before public audiences is a central part of the job. And of course, above and beyond just careers, there's the kind of persuasion that takes place in public situations, where not just politicians or important public figures, but ordinary citizens like you and me can involve ourselves in persuasive speaking in order to advocate for those causes, those public policies, and those social movements that are so important to us to achieve the goals that we need as a community. So the tools that you're going to learn in order to execute a successful public speech that's intended to persuade is going to be centrally important throughout your life. So that's what this assignment is geared at. So what are you going to need to do for a speech like this? Well, here are the basic parameters. The speech is going to be worth 175 points, which is 21% of our course grade in COMM 1200 public speaking. The speech is going to be intended to change people's thoughts, in other words, their beliefs, attitudes, or values, and or their behaviors. In other words, we want to go beyond just informing our audience about a particular idea and actually try to persuade them. In other words, to adjust their psychological preferences toward a particular idea or a particular action. The speech is intended to be 7 to 9 minutes long, so this is going to be a little bit longer than your informative speech, and rightly so, because the goal is going to be a bit more challenging, and there's additional things that you especially need to emphasize in a persuasive speech. As usual, there's going to be a bit of a fudge factor with regard to the time frame. You won't be penalized for going too short or too long unless the speech runs more than 30 seconds too short, in other words, 6 minutes and 29 seconds, or if it runs more than 30 seconds too long, in other words, 9 minutes and 31 seconds. So you've got a pretty good frame for accomplishing the variety of different tasks that you need to accomplish to persuade your audience. Now, a speech like this, in order to influence the thoughts or the actions of an audience, could take a variety of different forms. And remember, the topic is completely up to you, based on the things that you are interested in or feel passionate about, and you can think about how you can actually connect these things to your audience. So for instance, thesis statements such as the following. The United States should make 4 years of college free for all citizens. Christopher Columbus should not be celebrated with a holiday. You should start flossing your teeth twice a day. So notice that we're not just talking about great big ideas of massive public significance, but we could also be talking about things where you want to persuade your audience because it's going to be important on a local level or even on a very personal level. Anything where you need to try to psychologically shift the thoughts or the behaviors and actions of your audience is a viable topic for persuasive speech. And so your thesis statement is going to look something like this. Now, you need to have at least 5 research sources for this speech listed in proper APA format. And as we're going to discuss during this unit, what we want to do is take our basic ideas that we've developed earlier in the course regarding effective supporting material and think specifically about how those kinds of sources can really be effective in persuading our audience. So of course, we want to make sure that we're moving beyond the research sources that are very easy to find on the internet, yet potentially have difficulty with credibility. Any source that's anonymous, where we don't know who's actually coming up with this information, basic online encyclopedias and reference works like Wikipedia, about.com, things like that. You really want to stay away from these kinds of sources, because the sources are not just supposed to provide solid, credible information that will convince your audience about your argument, but also say something about you as a credible, authoritative public persuader. So the sources need to reflect the kind of effect you want to have on your audience. Audiovisual presentation aids, at least one, is going to be required for this speech. And you can think about the kinds of audiovisual presentation aids in a very wide and creative way. We'll have a unit about how to do presentation aids most effectively. So of course you can use a multimedia aid such as the PowerPoint that was used to create this video, or you could do something much more simple such as photographs, such as a brief video or audio clip, such as the use of props or 3D models. Anything that will be helpful to give your audience some kind of tactile, physical way of understanding some of the ideas or concepts that you're talking about is going to be important. And so you want to learn how to do this. If you haven't used a visual aid yet in a public speech, you need to learn how to do so for this speech. And of course, just like our previous assignment in speaking to inform, we want to speak extemporaneously. So you're going to prepare a full sentence working outline using the format that we've talked about in class. So make sure to go back to those examples and go back to the requirements for an effective working outline. If you weren't as successful in using the proper format last time around, you may have found that it ended up causing some problems in your speech with regard to the clear and explicit articulation of your organizational structure. So make sure that you get the working outline as correct as possible this time around. And then, of course, you're going to rehearse with this working outline, eventually wean yourself off of it till you get to the point that you'll be able to present your speech from a speaking outline. Just like the last speech, a maximum of 5 note cards. You want to make sure that these note cards are going to maintain a sense of your organizational structure. You still want to write it in an outline format. You still want to make indications on these cards where you're going to have your transitions and where you're going to have your topic sentences. If you didn't have these indicated on your speaking outline notes last time around, you may have found that it resulted in some problems with the clarity of letting the audience know what the topic sentence was for a particular section, or how you moved from one main point to the next main point by summarizing the first point and previewing the next one. So make sure you've got things like topic sentences, transitions, and other notes to yourself to make sure that you emphasize the things that you need to emphasize effectively. That being said, another area in the speaking outline where some of you may have found some difficulty last time involves putting too much detail in your notes. You want to make sure that you've just got keywords and phrases, occasionally having more verbatim details such as specific statistics or a direct quotation or something like that. That's absolutely essential if you need to present that information precisely. But otherwise, you really want to make sure the speech is coming from inside you, and it's not something that you're reading from your notes. It affects your credibility not just when you're informing your audience like you did in the last round, but if you want to persuade your audience, a big part of that, as we'll discuss, is being able to come across as a credible, authoritative, and attractive speaker. And so being able to speak extemporaneously in a conversational style, yet in a style that is complete and well-structured, is absolutely important. So making sure that the working outline and the speaking outline are done correctly can really make the difference. So, okay, you're thinking to yourself, I know I need to persuade my audience, and I've got some specific ideas about the kind of topic I might want to use, but the big question you're going to start off with perhaps is, so how am I going to persuade this audience? If I've got a topic, then what do I need to do next? Well, this is where the strategy report assignment is really going to come in handy. As I said at the beginning of this video, the strategy report is basically designed to give you the tools necessary to prepare your speech in advance. So, The assignment is worth 50 points, 6% of your course grade, and you're going to complete it in advance of the persuasive speech. The goals here essentially are three. To determine your specific rhetorical purpose, again, not just your topic and not just the thesis statement, the main claim, but what is it specifically that you want to do with or for or to your audience? What is the ideal outcome of the speech? Secondly, you're going to want to identify persuasive strategies that are specifically designed for this audience. And finally, you're going to get advanced feedback on these thoughts, your initial audience analysis and construction of persuasive strategies prior to the speech. That way, you're thinking the process of persuasion through carefully, systematically, and completely before you actually commit to developing the entire speech. So, what's going to happen here is 3 pages maximum. This is not a very long written assignment at all, but what you need to do in those 3 pages is going to be important. Note that these 3 pages do not include a references list, which you also need to include. This references list is going to have a minimum of 5 sources that you could use for the speech. These won't necessarily be the 5 or more sources that you'll ultimately go with by the time you're finished preparing the speech, but when you turn in the strategy report, it's going to be important that you've done some advanced research from good quality sources and you've got those listed in your references list as well as discussed in the report. What you're going to do in the 3 pages is essentially the following. You need to provide your specific rhetorical purpose. As I said before, not just the topic and not just the thesis, but what is the ideal outcome with regard to your audience? What do you want to do in terms of influencing their thoughts or their actions? You're going to need to have some discussion of audience analysis. What do you know about your audience so far in terms of the demographic information and so forth that we found with our initial audience analysis survey in class, as well as what do you know about the prior exposure and potential predisposition that your audience might have to your selected topic? Now, if there's things about your audience that you don't know related to your topic, then you want to talk about that as well. What kinds of things do you not know that you want to know that might be the fodder, for instance, of a supplemental survey that we can do to gather additional information about our audience? Of course, you're going to want to discuss persuasive strategies. What specific kinds of things can you do in terms of the construction of your argument, in terms of specific direct appeals to your audience, in terms of your presentation style and your use of audiovisual presentation aids that are going to help you achieve the specific purpose that you've identified? What sort of organizational pattern are you going to use? If you've got a sense of the major points you need to present in order to persuade your audience, what sort of structure do you need to provide them in? And importantly, something you don't want to skip, why do you want to use that organizational pattern? Why use this particular sequence of main points? How is this going to relate to a larger logical or psychological persuasive strategy? And finally, you'll want to discuss the sources that you found so far. Not just listing them and not just saying what the sources are, but you're going to need to discuss why these specific sources are potentially going to be useful for your persuasive speech assignment. This is going to mean that you don't just need to have the names of the sources and be able to cite them in your references list. You need to actually read these sources. You need to look carefully at them and think about why they're going to be useful. If you don't know yet whether or not they're going to be useful, that's probably because you haven't thought enough about your topic and you haven't actually read the sources. So by the time you present this report, you really want to have a good sense up front what your topic and purpose is, what sort of thoughts you have about your audience, and what more you need to find out, what kind of main points you're going to present, what sort of strategies are going to be important, and what sort of evidence is out there. So this is not a speech that you're going to be able to present at the last minute because you need to think about, analyze, and strategize for this. And that's what the strategy report is all about. Okay, so we're going to have some more details and look at some samples in class. If you have any questions at all about the assignment, as usual, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.